All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff. This is book number 2 in his, I don't know what this is called. But anyway, it's the sequel to Empire of the Vampire, which I reviewed last year, and it was one of my favorite books last year. Just a magnificent book. If you want to watch my review of this one first, just type in my last name, Durfee, Empire of the Vampire, and that review will magically appear upon your television screen. Just so you know, Jay Kristoff is also the author of this Night's Dawn trilogy, which was one of my favorite new fantasy series that I've ever read, and I've reviewed all these books too. Absolutely magnificent books. And he carries on the tradition of fantastic writing and storytelling with Empire of the Damned. Now, this has got a great book cover done. You know, I love graphic design and cover illustration. These are done really well, and they look well. They really look great together. They look like they match, like they're part of a series. The cover illustration for both was done by Jason Chan. Now, in this book, there's some interior illustrations. We've got a lot of cool things. We've got these maps. Some of the dopest maps of any fantasy book I've ever seen. These are just detailed, really gorgeous maps. I love those maps. And there's a whole host of them, too. And then we've got just great illustrations throughout by an artist named Bon Orthwick. And I will just kind of show you a handful of them. But I bet there's about 50 in here. But they're all just really kind of cool, gothic-looking illustrations. Bloody vampire fun, which is what this book is all about. And each of the chapter things kind of have a little iconic image like that. Try to find one more good illustration. Anyway, so these are basically epic fantasy novels that are highly focused on vampires. I mean, Kristoff's writing style is very plush and gorgeous, very descriptive, exactly what I love. This world he's created in this epic vampire fantasy series is sort of Victorian, very vibrant, plush, delicious Victorian setting where everything is gorgeous and dark and gothic. I mean, if you're an emo or a goth, these books, you got to read these books. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. This is very, very much like that. Very Dracula-esque, very Bram Stoker-esque, but mixed with a lot of Game of Thrones type political intrigue and fantasy adventure and action. But more of a Victorian era settings where you've got flintlock pistols and a few things like that going on. Very, very good. One of the other things I wanted to mention in this book, which Kristoff does very well, is he has a character list in the beginning of each book, and as you read the descriptions of each character in the book, and it's several pages long, and each character gets about a paragraph long description. If you read that before the book, which you will, which gives you each character description, gives you a very fun and it's a very fun and useful way to sort of do a synopsis of the previous book here, which is cool because you have fun reading about each character's description, but as you're getting the description, you're also getting backstory on what happened in book 1, and it was just absolutely brilliant. And I know he did that same thing with the Night's Dawn trilogy. It's just a great thing. Another thing I wanted to point out before we get to this is book size. Okay, so this is book 1, which looks massively bigger than book 2, but it's not. They're the same exact page count. It's just for whatever reason they used paper that was a thicker paper that made this book thicker, and a less thicker paper that made this book thinner. Even though they're both about 725 pages, this one looks twice as big. Now, my publisher did kind of the same thing with my books in that this book is 900 pages. This book is 1,200 pages, but because of the thickness of the paper, the 1,200-page book actually looks smaller than the 900-page book. Hey, it is what it is. Publishers, the world of publishing is a mad fucking fun house, people. You never know what you're going to get. And they always say, well, we can't publish big books because, well, you know, they crammed, this is 700 pages realistically, but they crammed 700 pages into this small thing. So literally, they could literally do 1,400 pages if they use the right paper. I'm just saying. Whenever a publisher says, we can't do big books, they are full of utter horse shit. I'm just saying. Okay. That was a rant that I didn't need to go on. Now let's get to this book review itself. So Gabriel is the last Silver Saint. He is he had a rough childhood, as we found out in book number 1. He is a pale blood, which means his mother was a mortal person. His father was an immortal vampire. So he's called a pale blood. He's the disgraced champion of the Holy Brotherhood. He's excommunicado. As you know, he's sort of like the John Wick of this series. You know how John Wick kept getting excommunicado from the Assassin's Guild or whatever was going on in John Wick Fantasyland. Okay, so anyway, this book starts out as book 1 did, in a dungeon where Gabriel is held prisoner by a vampire named Jean Francois. And Jean Francois is a scribe, and he is semi-torturing, semi-asking Gabriel to tell his story. This is a storytelling convention that, of course, became very famous when Patrick Rothfuss used it in the Name of the Wind series. And Jay Kristoff employs it in this series to a little bit of a different effect. One of the things that's crazy about this book is since Gabriel is relaying this story to this scribe, there's a really weird punctuation convention that Jay Kristoff is using in that everything in the book is written within quotation marks. A lot of times within 3 quotation marks. I was trying to puzzle together when 2 quotation marks were being used and when 3 quotation marks were being used for different passages, trying to figure out, well, okay, if I was a copy editor, it would have driven me mad. Rothfuss does not use that type of punctuation setup in his story, but Kristoff does. Now, it doesn't mean anything to the story. It's just as a writer, I was like, I would drive myself bonkers trying to figure out if every single thing, every sentence, or every paragraph I wrote was in quotation marks. How because somebody's narrating the story. Anyway, I don't even know if I'm making sense, and I could probably... It's just I'm looking at these pages, and I'm like, every single thing is in quotations. Some in 3 quotations. Anyway, okay. Let's get back to the... So he's telling his story to the narrator. He's got talking, Gabriel, in the story that he tells. So we're in this present situation in the dungeon where Gabriel is narrating the story to the narrator, Jean Francois, and he's telling this story in the present time about things that happened in his past and his youth. And so in the story of his youth is where 95% of the story is taking place in this book. And he's got his sword Ash Drinker that talks to him. So we've got a talking sword, an epic sword. We've got Dior, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of these names correctly. I think they're very Southern French language is kind of where we're going with this, very France. Dior is a 16-year-old girl, an orphan, from the gutters and slums. She dresses as a boy to kind of hide her identity as a girl. Her Now, the thing that's interesting about Dior is her blood holds some healing power, and it's kind of like there's this search for the Holy Grail within this story, and it's almost kind of known that since her blood is the healing power, that she might be the one to fulfill the destiny of the Holy Grail. It's not really kept a secret. Now, the third character that I'm going to talk about is Gabriel's sister, Celine, who in book number 1, there's some brutal things that happen early on in that, and this Celine still haunts Gabriel as an undead. Well, she's a vampire. I mean, that's what she is a brutally evil ghost from his past slash present day vampire slash undead slash just not very nice person to Gabriel. And so there's a quest that sort of involves all these 3 characters along with some other characters, and I'm not going to say who or what, some other characters that you may or may not have thought were dead after this book, and they just go on this quest for I will read the jacket copy because I've rambled on a lot and we're not learning a lot from my review. So Gabriel de Leon has saved the Holy Grail from death, but his chance to end the endless night is lost. After turning his back on the Silver Saint brothers once and for all, Gabriel and the Grail set out. So Gabriel, the Grail, we know the Holy Grail is Dior. Anyway, Gabriel and the Grail, Dior, has set out to learn the truth of how Daith's death might finally be undone. But the last Silver Saint faces peril, within and without, pursued by children of the Forever King, drawn into wars and webs, centuries in the weaving, and ravaged by his own bloodlust. Gabriel may not survive to see the truth of the Grail revealed, a truth that may be too awful for any to imagine. One thing I will say is there's sex in this book. I mean, Jay Kristoff does not shy away from the sex scenes, a lot of them, but it's kind of like Interview with a Vampire. It's just part of vampire lore and part of the vampire whole goth, emo, sort of Victorian era story is the sexual nature of the vampires, which was very evident in Bram Stoker's vampires. What was that called? Dracula. When I reviewed Dracula, I was like, this is like really just kind of about people's aversion to sex in the Victorian age. Well, their feigned aversion to sex. They were really super horny, but they pretended not to be. But the vampires brought out the kinky bondage side of them, which they really enjoyed. And so, Twilight is about it. Every vampire story is about True Blood and this. So just know going in that you're going to get a lot of relationships, a lot of romantic entanglements, a lot of sex scenes, a lot of sexily written sex scenes. I absolutely love these books. Jay Kristoff is probably my favorite within my handful of my favorite modern day fantasy writers. I think this book is dope. It's dynamite. It's every bit as good as this one, maybe even better, and I loved this one. So I'm going to give Empire of the Damned a solid 10 out of 10, and see you later.